What is good, everyone? Welcome to this video. I'm Charlie from Conscious Creation, and in this video I'm going to be sharing with you what the Christ consciousness grid is, how it's been created, and how it is allowing us to enter into that of what is called the new earth. Now, the information that I'm going to be sharing with you is way outside that of normal thinking, and I do not expect you to believe everything that I'm going to tell you. However, try to keep an open mind, and as the story goes along, it will start to make more and more sense. So a lot of this information comes from Junvalo Melchizedek's books, but I think this information is incredibly valuable and I really want to share it with you. We're going to start off by talking about what this grid actually is. What is it? The Christ consciousness grid is a crystalline or an energetic structure that encompasses our planet and allows us as a collective to maneuver into a higher state of awareness and consciousness. Now, to understand how it's been created and why it's been created, I'm going to have to give you a bit of a history lesson, and we're going to go way back into the magical time of Atlantis. There's not a lot of evidence to suggest and prove that Atlantis actually existed. However, Plato believed it existed. A lot of our ancient cultures, the Hopi, the Kogi, they have memories of lifetimes in that of Atlantis. We've got that of the Toronto documents. We've got these ancient stones with carvings of the ancient city. And my personal favorite reference is the Lost City of Atlantis Disney film.
That, according to our friend Plato here, was suddenly struck by some cataclysmic event that sank it beneath the sea. Now, some of you may ask, why Atlantis? It's just a myth, isn't it? Pure fantasy. Well, that is where you'd be wrong. 10,000 years before the Egyptians built the pyramids, Atlantis had electricity, advanced medicine, even the power of flight. Impossible, you say? Well, no, not for them. Numerous ancient cultures all over the globe agree that Atlantis possessed a power source of some kind, more powerful than steam, than coal, more powerful than our modern internal combustion engine.
Now, in the time of Atlantis, as a collective, we were in a heightened state of awareness, which basically means we lived primarily from our heart center. We were more in a flow state. We were connected more to each other and to the environment that we lived in, and we lived in more harmony. Now, it actually takes hundreds and thousands of years to get to this level of awareness naturally, but this is where we were. During this time, there were about 1,000 ascended masters. Now, what's an ascended master? An ascended master is someone who has used esoteric wisdom and esoteric knowledge to become immortal within their human form. Now, there's one in particular that I'm going to be talking about today that actually helped build this Christ consciousness grid, and his name is Thoth. He was named something different in Atlantis, but as he came to Egypt, he was known as Thoth, and he was also known as Hermes by that of the Greeks. Thoth, being an ascended master, he was immortal, and he was the king of Atlantis for 52,000 years. Now, a lot of our language, mathematics, geometry come from Thoth the Atlantean. He also writ that of the Emerald Tablets. Now, a lot of our scriptures and religious texts nowadays are actually highly distorted because for thousands of years, this planet has been ruled primarily through that of masculine energy. When a lot of female views were presented, they were discarded. And because of this masculine-driven way of creating things, it creates this distortion. It's less pure and therefore less truthful. Now, Thoth was a scribe, so all of this time that he was alive, he was able to observe what was going on in the environment, and he wrote this down. This is how he gained all of this knowledge and wisdom. And a lot of the information that I'm going to present with you today comes from Thoth the Atlantean. Now, he had a wife named Shizat, and she was also a scribe. And so we both have the masculine and the feminine perspective. Thoth, being an ascended master, he could do things which we would call fantasy, but he was a prophet. Now, there's actually been a lot of famous prophets in our past. A very famous one is known as Edgar Cayce, and he did thousands of predictions. And out of all the predictions that he did, he only got one wrong. It's because he accidentally did a twin brother instead of the twin he was meant to be working with. So Thoth was a prophet, and he could predict that something called a pole shift was going to happen. Now, this is when the magnetic North Pole and the magnetic South Pole is a switch around. Now, when this happens, a lot of land mass starts to change, and this was going to cause Atlantis to sink and actually going to cause us to drop our state of awareness or consciousness. So basically, we maneuvered from our heart, from that flow state, and more into our mind, and we started to build more of the ego. Now, the ego is not a bad thing, but because of its state of awareness, it's stuck in survival mode. Now, when you're stuck in survival mode, you see yourself more separate from people, separate from the environment, and as that starts to build, you become more self-destructive towards yourself and to the environment around you. If we look around, how have we treated each other for long periods of time? How much damage have we done to the planet? So Thoth, being an ascended master, he got permission from an even higher state of awareness in our universe to build a synthetic grid that would help us get to the same level of awareness that we were in Atlantis, but in a much shorter time frame. Like I said, it takes hundreds and thousands of years to get to that level of awareness, but it was agreed that because we were in that state of awareness before, that we could have a synthetic grid to help us get there much, much quicker. Otherwise, we become self-destructive to ourselves and to the planet. So he went about and actually started to build this grid. Now, how do we know these grids even exist in the first place? Now, a chap called Lyle Watson did a very famous experiment known as the 100th monkey experiment. And what they did is they went to Japan, and in Japan they have all the different islands. Now, what they wanted to test was if one monkey changed their behavior, would the rest of the monkeys follow suit? And this would clarify if there was a grid. So I'll explain. So these monkeys that they focused on is they enjoyed eating sweet potato. However, it was covered in dirt and sand. Now, one young female monkey figured out that if she was to wash the sweet potato in the water, that it would be clear of sand and dirt, and she could enjoy it without the dirt and sand. When she started to then tell her monkey family and her monkey friends, is they all started to do the same. Now, the interesting point was that over a short period of time, all of the other monkeys on the other islands and even in the mainland of Japan, even though there was no communication, they all started to do the same. They all started to wash their sweet potato. Now, how is this possible? Because according to Thoth, every species, every insect has its own grid energetically encompassing the planet, and it's the geometry for that species or for that insect that is reflected within the grid. So as this monkey was washing her sweet potato, this information went into the grid of the species of that monkey, and it was available for the other monkeys to pick this up. We can see some similarities with us human beings. If you have an inventor, he comes up with an idea, and then suddenly, before it comes out, someone taps into this and they say, oh, they stole our idea because it was available in the grids. Also, when someone breaks past a certain threshold of what we believe was possible. So for example, when, I forgot what it was, I think the mile that was run in under 5 or 4 minutes, I forgot what time it was. And as soon as that person did that, lots of people started to follow suit after it. According to Thoth, us human beings are capable of 5 different levels of consciousness. Now, I'm just going to be focusing on the first 3 levels of consciousness because I haven't done the research on the others, and the first 3 are only relevant for now. So each level of consciousness relates to a grid, because we as human beings, according to Thoth, have 3 grids around the planet at the moment, and they all relate to these different levels of consciousness or awareness. Now there's something called the Phi Ratio or golden mean. Now what's this number? So this is a never-ending number, but the closer one gets to this number, the more peace, the more oneness, the more harmony that they feel. Now nature strives to get closer to this number, but so does consciousness, so does your awareness. This is why we want to strive to this number, to these higher levels of awareness, because that's when we experience more peace and more harmony. The first grid that was created was actually close to this Phi ratio, and most people are not attuned to this first grid, but there are a few people around the world, such as the Aborigines. Now the second grid that has been created is quite far away from the Phi ratio. It is a polarized grid, that of duality, good, bad, in, out, up, down, hot, cold. We see someone walking down the street, we don't like what they're wearing, so we judge them. It's just the nature of this level of awareness and this grid. And this staying in this grid for too long is what's going to cause much of the self-destruction towards each other and the planet. This is why Thoth wanted to create this Christ consciousness grid, because it gets us closer to the Phi ratio or golden mean. 200 years before the sinking of Atlantis, Thoth got permission to build the Giza Pyramid. How did he go about and do this? He went to something called the Unity Vortex, which was the original foundation in Atlantis that was built naturally over all those years, and he went to that exact spot. And this Unity Vortex is Thoth built a hole a mile deep, and out of this hole came these golden mean and Phi ratio patterns, and they went up above the planet. Thoth actually mapped out where these golden mean spirals went, and he placed and built the Giza Pyramid on this pattern. Now this Giza Pyramid was going to act like that of a foundation that was going to create a web of this energetic grid that was going to be created over a long period of time, which I'm going to share with you. Now you're probably asking, how did Thoth create this grid? He is a sixth dimensional being, which means being an ascended master, he could do incredible things, and he could actually maneuver the stones of the pyramids with his intention, through that of pure intention. And he actually built this Giza Pyramid in the higher dimensions first, and it was then anchored down into our physical reality. I talk about this in my other videos. When you are manifesting things, things come from the non-physical and then they're anchored into our physical reality. Now, when I was at school, I remember studying Greek mythology, and I was mostly interested in the Greek gods. And if you study that of Hermes, which is also that of Thoth, he was the Greek messenger god. He was the only god that could go into the underworld and come back. He could travel to different worlds, to different dimensions. And I just thought it was a really interesting correlation. This information was actually presented to the Egyptian government by Melchizedek in the 1990s, and that Thoth actually built this pyramid from the top down. They didn't believe him, but they went to go and check the pyramid. They checked the mortars between the stones, and it proved that the older stones were on the top and the younger ones were on the bottom, because he built it from the top down, using his intention and using his awareness. Now, there's also a very famous channeling done in the 1980s, and it's called the Ra material. In the Ra material, they talk about how Thoth did this, how he managed to build the Giza Pyramid using his awareness, because he was a sixth dimensional being, because he was an ascended master. If you look at the Giza Pyramid, there are actually two smaller pyramids next to it. And a chap called Ricky McCollum in the 1980s, I believe, actually did a bird's eye view and flew over the pyramids, and they saw the pattern of the Giza Pyramid and these two other ones. And they saw that it created or was in line with the golden mean spiral. And this is how they were able to find the original hole that Thoth had built to start with. What was going to happen is Thoth then actually built 83,000 sacred sites in the higher dimensions that were going to be anchored down into our physical reality over a 13,000 year period by us human beings and our tribes. Now we look at things like Stonehenge, all the pyramids down out of Japan, the ones in Peru, the ones in Mongolia. Now they were going to act like nodal points, creating this spider web of energy to create the synthetic Christ consciousness grid. If you look at the Egyptians as well, they were fascinated with consciousness, they were fascinated with awareness, but since the time of Atlantis to that of Egypt, there wasn't enough time to create this level of awareness that we were in Atlantis naturally, and that's why they used all these tools like that of the Ankh to try and get to these higher states of awareness. In the same way, Thoth was using this grid in a synthetic way. Now this is actually known as an ancient science known as Geomancy. Now Geomancy basically means learning to maneuver the flow of energy through that of crystals, rocks and brass wiring. Through these sacred sites, it's going to help maneuver the flow of the energy throughout this 13,000 year period. The flow of the energy within the earth can actually maneuver through that of big events like tectonic plates, moving, volcanoes, earthquakes, but these sacred sites being big enough and powerful enough were able to help maneuver the energy, which would eventually create this grid. And that is why now is so special, because this grid is activated. People are able to tap into this higher state of awareness. Now, it was actually the Russians and the United States of America that were able to discover the second grid, which most people are tuned into, in the 1960s. And they were able to discover the geometry within that grid. And it's always Russia, they've always got the crazy science over there. But they were able to find this. Now, the interesting point is that most of the military bases between that of Russia and the United States are around or on the nodal points of these sacred sites. Why? If you control the grid, you control how people think, and you control how people feel. Now, what's some more evidence to suggest or back up the things that I am saying? So there's another chap called Carl P. Monk who also wrote a book called The Code, like that of the global Earth matrix. And he studied all of these sacred sites, 83,000 of them. And he realized that they all had this special code, and he was able to decode this and figured out that every single site came to a 3-digit number that measured the longitude and the latitude. And he said the precision that was needed in order to create this grid, you would need such high-end technology, you would need satellites all the way around the planet, but we know that wasn't available over this 13,000 year period. And with this story, it would back up that Thoth was the one who created it in these higher dimensions first. This is why I believe now is so special, because this grid is available. It's like that of the 100th monkey experiment. More and more people can tap into it. It's like popcorn, and people are waking up and having more and more of these spiritual awakenings. They're tapping into this high state of awareness and getting closer to that of that Phi Ratio. And we can see more people are taking care of each other and of the planet itself. So thank you for watching. I will put a free meditation below that can help you with the process of connecting to your heart if you want to give it a go. Apart from that, thank you for watching. Peace and take care.